He's calling them to production, to bearing fruit, to produce something into a situation, to impart it and bring it into a situation. I mean, when I saw the little boy at the door, I'm looking at him and I'm seeing him actually responding to the Spirit of God and bearing fruit, bearing a good work, coming to the well. He made it very clear it wasn't obedience. It was not about obeying anything. He really wanted to. When he looked at my face and he said he wanted to do that, that really touched me, that he really wanted to. He wanted to give. As opposed to people who don't want to give. They give because they have to, or they give because they're shamed into it, which I could do, by the way. I'm really good at it. If you've been a pastor for any length of time, you learn how to shame people into doing things instead of introducing them to Jesus Christ where they fall in love, and it just doesn't matter anymore. And you're saying to me the other day, it really meant a lot to me. If you're ever moving, just give me a call. I can break away and help you move some furniture. That's what Jesus is talking about. When you're connected with me and you're connected in love, then it bears fruit. But when you've done something good, how have you felt as a result? Felt pretty good, right? When you think of something you did that was good and you say, I felt pretty good afterwards. As opposed to when you've done something good and you haven't felt good. What comes to mind is the difference between the two. When you have to do something, it's a good thing, and you have to do it, and you feel lousy later, it's because there's no love involved. You may be responding to authority, which is not a bad thing, but Jesus isn't talking about authority in here, in case you should notice. He's not talking about it, he's talking about love all the time. When we do something because we have to, and it's good, it's a good work, it's a good thing, and as a result we're not feeling very happy, very good, check the love barometer. Right away you'll find out. And you can say, no, I love my wife, I love my husband, I love my son. You can say it all you want. What you're left with as a result is a clear indication of where we're at in our love for God and how much love from Him we've actually received. It's a love issue is what it is. And that's what Jesus is talking about. He's bathing this whole thing in love. In chapter 14, he hits faith quite a bit. Actually, he hits faith throughout, but there's like 5 or 6 verses on believing in faith. In this chapter, he's all over the love thing. He started in John 14, but he's still talking about love quite a bit here in chapter 15, to the point where we didn't read the 14th verse, but it's that verse where he goes beyond. He said, I'm not even calling you servants anymore. There's a shift, and while everybody's singing, I am a friend of God, I am a friend of... You gotta go read the text, because a friend, according to Jesus, does what he says. So before we start singing wonderful choruses, I really think we ought to stop and say, am I a friend of God? I haven't even hit the servant level yet. And all of a sudden I'm claiming to be his friend? See, he says, I call you friends if you do what I've told you to do. He's shifting from a servant mentality to a friend. Well, there's a big difference between a servant and a friend. If we know anything about the culture he was in, a servant did things because they had to. They could feel miserable as a result. A friend, on the other hand, they don't even think about offering anything. They're friends. They're your friend. Phileo, it's one of the words for love in the New Testament in Greek. Peter, do you love me? Jesus uses one word. Peter comes back, yeah, we're really good friends. And that's a good step towards what Jesus is talking about, which is here he's talking about friends in John 15. Friends producing. The aspect of the Spirit is the Spirit of life. The Spirit of life. I want to give you a spirit of for everything, every P. Production, Spirit of life. John's Gospel began, in him was life. It's a nice way of saying, in him was the Spirit of life. Just like in the beginning, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. If you read John's Gospel, the waters are always reappearing because John's trying to say something in the Spirit, just like in the first creation. Now we've got the new creation, and a new creation is a matter of the Spirit. In him was the Spirit of life. Life produces life. I mean, that's what the resurrection and Easter is about. Life produces life. The Spirit of life produces life versus death, versus hibernating, If life is not producing life, there's only one of like three conditions we can find ourselves in. We're either dead, but we think we're alive. Wasn't that the message to the Laodicean church? You think you got it all together. You're poor, you're wretched, but you think you got it all together because you're a rich, powerful church. You've ushered out what you call the gospel all over the world. So people are being led into types of gospels that Paul said, I'm afraid that another gospel will go out. And it did, and it does, all the time. Or just hibernating, just sleeping. Well, I'll sleep for a few years. Geez, not for anything. It's been like 25 years. How long are you going to sleep? It's a bit like that. Or you're just in a condition that's called barren. Enough on that P. As we move to the second P in the end here, in chapter 15, you're going to read 18, 19, and 20.
Okay. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they would keep yours also.
26 and 27.
But when the Helper comes, whom I shall send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father, will testify of me. And you will also bear witness, because you have been with me from the beginning.
And then chapter 16, verses 1 and 2.
These things I have spoken to you, that you should not be made to stumble. They will put you out of the synagogues. Yes, the time is coming that whoever kills you will think that he offers God service.
It shouldn't be hard to pick up on what the second P is for this morning, because he mentioned, persecution. He's not pulling any punches with the boys. He raises the pole at the bar when he starts talking about bearing fruit, that it's not going to be a Sunday school picnic. He takes them, walks them through it, and says, and bearing fruit can be pretty challenging. While you're trying to bear fruit, they're trying to kill you. Basically, that's what happens. Don't be surprised, because you've probably noticed that happen to me. If they hate me, they hate you. The sad part about this, you could almost understand when he was talking about, I don't know if you noticed, first he starts talking about in the world. You could understand the spiritual conflict. Light hits dark and, the whole demon. You can understand that part of it. Did you notice where he shifted in the 16th chapter? He's talking about in the synagogue. Now those would have been their brothers and sisters. That would have been relative to the church. When we went to England, one of my first newsletters back home was how God was blessing the work that he sent us to do. We were doing what he said, and there was tremendous blessings associated with it in the mission field. But what I didn't expect was the cold and hatred that the rest of the church had in Swanage for our arrival. It blew my mind that my brothers and sisters, who would have thought, thank God, more help. I mean, let's face it, 95% of the town was unsaved. You would have thought we could use a little help here. So help shows up, and they don't like them. It's not Swanage, by the way. I bet everybody in this room can think of different churches in Rochester where they don't fellowship at all, they don't like each other, they don't agree. I'm not asking you to, but I'm sure you can. There's a reason why, some churches hold these seminars. What would you do if somebody showed up in your church with a gun? Which is a reasonable concern nowadays. And 50 churches are invited and 6 show up. There is so much nonsense going on. And Jesus is saying, that's going to happen. I don't want to lead you to believe that you're going to go out the door and your biggest problem is going to be the world. You're going to have as big a problem, if not bigger. He actually talks about them killing them in the church. And they'll think they're doing God's work. When you study the Crusades and what happened in the name of Jesus, it's quite heavy what he's talking about, the kinds of things that will happen. But the key word is persecution. And what he's talking about is suffering, the S word, that none of us want to get near. Let's face it. I don't think we get up in the morning unless there's something particularly peculiar about your outlook on life that would say, I just can't wait to get to work and suffer today. If anything, we're praying the opposite. I can't wait to get to work and for once not suffer. Just because suffering's not fun. It's painful. Suffering's not the kind of place that I want to be. Even when I hear, yes, but there's suffering and there's fruit involved. Yeah, I get all that. I'd like to, can I bear the fruit? Can I carry it without having to suffer through it? Can I just do something good without having to suffer? And you'll get a lot of those opportunities too. I'm not saying that every time you bear fruit, you're going to suffer. But I'm telling you, there's going to be a lot of suffering associated with fruit production. A lot of persecution. The whole book of 1 Peter has to do with suffering. So he's not pulling any punches. When's the last time you had a good message on suffering? Today I want to talk about suffering. You don't hear about suffering very much. Yet it's from cover to cover. It's not a new subject. And the good thing about the men and women of God, they don't pull any punches. They could have written a gospel. They could have written letters to the churches that stayed away from the subject. Why? Because Christians don't suffer. Well, in the Comforter, it has a really weird place in our lives. If you're supposed to comfort, what's it comforting us from? It must be comforting us from something that's uncomfortable. I mean, after a while, it gets kind of silly. Of course there's going to be discomfort with this world and this life. Philippians 3, verses 8 and 10.
More than that, I count all things to be lost in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, so that I may gain Christ, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, and the fellowship of his suffering, being conformed to his death.
Paul's talking about, through the suffering, everything that goes along with it, we become more like Jesus. In Romans 8, he equates suffering with growing up and becoming a son of God. So while we're trying to avoid suffering, that's what children do, don't they? I won't grow up. I won't grow up. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to school. What are they again? They're called remember?
The Lost Boys.
Lost
Thank you very
Boys.
much. They're lost boys. And they're acting like lost boys do. And yet, what Paul's referring to is this road that goes down suffering, is how you grow up, and then you are in tune to the Spirit of God, the voice of God, so you recognize when he's handing you a piece of fruit to bear, to carry, if you would.